You know, I went to the University of Georgia, and I hail from Atlanta, but if we're being honest with ourselves, I really live on planes and in airports. You can ask my husband, you can ask my mom, dad, nieces, nephews. I'm always about 24 hours from hopping on a flight to somewhere, okay? And that's ultimately because of my job. I have a passion for sports, so I go wherever they are. As the first full-time female host of Football Night in America for NBC, it's been quite an interesting journey to make it to this moment. But it's also allowed me to cover some of the greatest sports on earth. I've been to the Olympics, I've worked Final Fours, I've worked national championships, unfortunately not the one that Georgia won over the last 2 years. But I've seen some of the best athletes ever compete at the height of the game. But when I'm in airports, I feel like there's certain things that I can tie to life that has helped me progress throughout my career. You know, when you're in an airport, it's frustrating, right? You show up a couple hours early, you know that you gotta check your bag, you're trying to find ways to make sure that you get security quick, but the line might be wrapped around the block, and then you finally make it to your gate only to find out maybe it's moved or maybe your flight's delayed. You get on the plane, and then it's just your luck. There's a toddler sitting right behind you that has a tendency to kick the entire flight, and their parents aren't gonna tell them to stop, right? That's just the way of it when you're flying. And what's interesting is that in your journey or throughout life, a lot of those same frustrations seem to rear their ugly heads. You know, one of the first things that you do when you show up at the airport is check your bag, right? So you have to arrive at the airport 2 hours early, and it takes a couple of things. It's gonna take trust and it's gonna take commitment, right? You gotta trust that the individuals that are tagging your bag are actually gonna get it to the destination, because I've arrived in places and there was no bag, and although it gave me a great excuse to go shopping, because I love to shop, it's not exactly what you want. But it also takes commitment, right? Because you have to get there a few hours early, probably earlier than you'd like to, just to make sure that the bag gets on the flight. Now, when I first started out in media, sports media specifically, I was carrying around this baggage, right? We're gonna call it emotional baggage, and it was heavy. Y'all, the wheel was broken, the handle was jacked up, I was pulling it down here, it probably weighed about 50 pounds, and it all revolved around one central idea. And it's a simple statement. You are a black woman in sports, and you will never be good enough. See, the reality of the world that I was trying to operate and grow and be successful in is that it was overwhelmingly white and male. The Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport has the numbers to prove it, but as I went on the road and as I lived in the space, I felt it every single day. In fact, I remember going to a college football seminar, and I was literally the only woman of color that was covering college football at the time. And although I wanted to believe that I was breaking barriers and I was doing all of these great things, the reality is I was carrying baggage with me. Now, what's interesting about this is I remember the exact moment when I was able to lay that bag aside, and it actually happened in a place you guys would never guess, but Provo, Utah. That's right, Provo, Utah. I was on the road with Matt Millen, who was my analyst when I first started out in college football, and we used to always get to the game sites very early. So we might get in on a Thursday, we would go and talk to players, we would go and talk to coaches, we would spend time at practices, we might even watch film so we could understand better what the teams were gonna do when they took the field on Saturdays. And then afterwards, we would go and get a meal. So we might go to the local restaurant, or we might end up at a Cracker Barrel, depends on where you are. In Provo, Utah, it just so happened to be a Cracker Barrel. And I remember we were sitting down chatting, having so much fun, catching up about the family, and he just stopped abruptly, and he looked me dead in my eyes, and he said one simple statement. It must be hard being the only black woman on this crew. It takes a lot of courage. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely seen in the space and in the body that I was operating in. And the crazy thing is, it was a 50-year-old white man that kind of like actually gave me the right to turn the handicap that I was carrying with me, which was my race and my gender, into courage. And so I would ask you on this journey of life or in your career, is there an emotional baggage that you can check? Because you have to check your emotional baggage. But also, is there someone who you can help check that bag? And for me, that was Matt Millen in Provo, Utah, and that gave me the courage to move on. Now, what's interesting about the airport is you think, you know what, I showed up early, I got my bag packed, now I've made it through security, great, I'm at my gate early, and the plane's gonna take off in 30 minutes, let's go. And then the reality is the gate agent has the right to hop on her microphone and tell you, guess what, ladies and gentlemen, we have some mechanical delays. We will now be taking off 3 hours later. And she says that with a smile. I've watched her do it, okay? And now we can all get up in arms, we can be mad about it, we can jump down her throat, go straight up to the gate and be like, what do you mean? But the reality is, we can't fix it. The ground crew has to go and fix the plane. I can't hop in and be the pilot if the pilot's not there yet, right? I can't be the flight attendant. I don't know how to do that. So we have to accept and expect delays. You gotta do it when you're in the airport, and you gotta do it in life. It's so interesting because when I started out in my career, there were so many moments when I had a mechanical issue, and I was thinking that this was gonna be the reason why my journey just completely stops. My career's gonna end here, or a delay. Maybe I thought I was supposed to get a job. And the reality is that delay was sitting right there for a reason. And one of the prime examples has to be one of my first ever regional games that I worked, okay? So it's Arkansas football game, and Arkansas is taking on like Arkansas, Texarkana University Union, St. Mary Mount, Virginia, okay? This game didn't matter at all, right? You don't know the team, don't look it up. And I just remember the game didn't matter to anyone, but it meant everything to me. When I say everything, absolutely everything, right? So I grabbed the mic, and the broadcast booth is throwing down to me, and it's my very first time coming on air in a regional network. And I remember I had so many nerves that I'm squeezing the mic so hard that I'm pressing down the mute button that resides on the back of the mic. Now, this was my first regional broadcast. I've never done a broadcast with a mute button, okay? I've never done a game this big. And so I'm squeezing the mic, they throw down to me, and here's what I look like on air. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, I pantomimed my first hit. There were no words. The producer's screaming in my ear, and I'm like, oh, I thought I killed it, you know? And he's like, no one even heard you. No one knows what you're talking about. They had to throw back up and say, yeah, we're dealing with some technical difficulties. Apparently, the dummy down there doesn't know that there's a mute button. And now, looking back at it, I'm so thankful that that mechanical issue happened while I was on regional network with only my mom and dad watching and like maybe one of my closest friends, instead of when I was on prime time television. Literally 3 weeks ago, I was on a flight going from Houston to Atlanta, and the flight took off and we flew for 45 minutes. And the pilot got on the intercom and said, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a mechanical issue. We got to go back to Houston. I can guarantee you that it is so much better to find out you have a mechanical issue when you were on the ground than it is to find out when you were in the air. Because I'm like, so yo, what does that mean though? Like, did an engine fall off? Like, are we okay? Is it just like an exit light? You know, and that's because the consequences are so much greater when you have a mechanical issue or a delay when you take off and you're in the air. You want all of those issues and delays to happen while you're still on the ground, AKA early in your career. So now, you have successfully made it to the gate, you made it through your delay, you are on the runway, and you're so excited. Your captain comes over the intercom, and he's like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we are #1 for takeoff, and we will be now headed to our destination. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin. All right, we're ready. Our seatbelts are fastened. And then you realize that you were about to enter the scariest part of flying, because somehow this jet that weighs over 100 tons is just going to take off and go in the air, okay? So we don't talk about it that much, but that's a little scary. Elevating off the ground in a jet is scary to me. And you feel it too, right? Because there's a lot of velocity and speed that is required, and you're shaking the entire time. And the reality is there is some point in our lives where we are really going to feel the turbulence of takeoff. So for me, I felt as though that happened when I was getting prepared for my last contract negotiations. It was an opportunity for me to finally be #1 for takeoff. I felt like this was going to be the contract that defined me, that changed my life, the opportunity to get back everything that I felt like I had worked for and I felt like I had earned. But instead, my very private contract negotiations went public. And mainstream media was talking about what I was worth or what I was not worth, what my work was worth, and whether I deserved to be paid something comparable to my peers. So in that moment of turbulence, I often just felt worthless. Literally, my husband would have to be like, you gotta get on this plane. You have to get out of the bed. And it took everything in me, all of my energy to just keep going, because I felt as though when the viewers were watching me, all they were seeing was what was written about me. And on top of all that, I was in the center of a public drama that I felt like I did not incite but had been drawn into, and it was completely distracting from what I love to do most, and that's present and entertain on television. So I remember when all of this came to a head. It was 2021, the NBA Finals. We're in Phoenix. It is game one. And I had built up this shield of courage and strength that was holding me completely together, and I just felt it cracking right before we go on air. When I tell you tears were welling up in my eyes, they were starting to sting my cheeks, and I'm wiping them away, and then the director gets in my ear, and he starts his countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Why is this happening to me? 5. What did I do to deserve this? 4. What if all of my coworkers hate me? 3. How am I going to survive this? 2. I really want to be anywhere but here. 1. Welcome to the 2021 NBA Finals, where the Phoenix Suns are set to take on the Milwaukee Bucks in game one of what is sure to be a thrilling series. We came on air, ladies and gentlemen, and for 30 minutes, I talked. In the breaks, I wiped tears. And to this day, I still have absolutely no clue what I talked about. Nothing. I remember running back immediately, ripping off my mic and going into a back green room and calling my mom, because that's what we do when we're over 30. You're still gonna call your mom. And I'll never forget her being on the phone, and she was stoic, and she just asked me 2 questions, and she said, what happens if you quit? And what happens if you finish strong? And the reality was, what she was trying to get at was, if you do not finish strong, it is quite possible that no one that ever looks like you or sounds like you or moves like you will ever be able to occupy the seat that you are occupying right now. So you gotta make a decision. The reality is, you have the opportunity to shut up rumors and those weird whispers that come out when someone sees you on TV, and some of them sound like this: she's an affirmative action hire. She only got the job because she's a girl. Look what she looks like. She doesn't deserve equal compensation. Her work is not comparable to her male peers. The whispers, right? The only person that can get it is you, because you sit in the seat. So I got off the phone with my mom. The fasten seatbelt sign came on. I got back in my chair, and I did halftime. The reality is, we are all trailblazers. It might have been me sitting in that seat, but it might be you being the first, taking brazen footsteps to do something no one else has ever done. Or you could literally be walking the same path, but the reality is that your story is going to add to the testimony that it can be done. So the way that you move and the way that you operate when you are hitting that turbulence of takeoff, it matters. Someone is looking at you and deciding how they are going to interact with the world moving forward based on how you react. All right, so now we've taken off, okay? And it's not easy. That was a little scary, right? But we got to get up to 20,000 feet, and once you get there, you're like, oh, cool, great, we're about to hit the cruising altitude, right? And I realized that once you start taking off, that doesn't mean the turbulence is over, because there's a little something called in-flight turbulence, okay? And that, too, is very scary if you've ever been on a plane. That's when, again, the captain comes on, and he's like, ladies and gentlemen, we are hitting a patch of rough air. We're going to have to put the fasten seatbelt sides back on, and flight attendants, please take your seats, because no one should be walking around at this time. It's a little too dangerous. To me, my in-flight turbulence, no doubt, was the 2021 NBA Finals, where I felt as though I was in a breathless free fall for 14 days. That's the 7 games of the series that was required for the Milwaukee Bucks to win. Keep in mind that a series could end in 4 games, and I was praying, I didn't care what team won. I was like, one of y'all just ended in 4 games, okay? But that's not what happened. And I can still remember that I had to have my dad travel with me, because yes, we're gonna call her dad. And he had to be my emotional support rock at every show. He had to stand behind the camera so I saw someone who loved and appreciated me and knew what I was worth, so that I could just be on television. And I remember at the end of the game, the fireworks are going off behind me, and I'm hugging my dad, and Milwaukee is celebrating their first title in 50 years, and it truly is a celebration. And during that time, I am sitting there squeezing my dad tight, and I'm saying goodbye. I'm saying goodbye to what I thought my journey would look like. I was saying goodbye to the idea of retiring at the company that I started my national broadcasting debut at. And I was also saying goodbye to ever feeling less than or unworthy ever again. And I walked away with all of the emotion drained from my body, the energy gone. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, there was a van sitting outside of my Milwaukee hotel. I hopped in that van, I got to Chicago O'Hare, and I got on, yes, another plane. It flew all the way to Tokyo, Japan, and that's where my journey began again, because I had to meet all of these people that were now going to be my new peers and my new colleagues and the producers that I was now going to work with, and it was completely a world away. And 24 hours after that, I was on air as the host of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Now, what's interesting about that story is, as soon as I arrived, I didn't recognize it then, but this was the actualization of a dream deferred. Let me take you all the way back to 1996 when the Olympics were in Atlanta. See, yeah, cute, right? My mom did everything in her power and was probably spending the money we actually didn't have to make sure that all three of her kids had an opportunity to take part and see the Olympics in all of its glory. So I still remember being at basketball games, at swim meets, at track meets, and being like, wow, I love sports. Like, this is where my passion and my fire for just competition at a high level at all began. And I thought to myself, I will one day find a way to make it back to the Olympics. I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was going to be as an athlete or what, but I was going to make it back. And then close to the last day that I was hosting the Tokyo Olympics, I was sitting in Tokyo's Olympic Stadium, and it hit me. The dream has been realized. And I had no clue that it was going to take a broken road to walk to get there. I had no clue that it will be trials, tribulations, and tears, and hugs, and encouraging phone calls that would bring me to that. But that's exactly what was required. Because see, the reality about turbulence is it forces a reaction. You can be fully asleep on a plane, and you feel that turbulence, and you start shaking, and you're like, oh, something's up. You gotta make a decision. Are you gonna sit there in the storm and watch all the lightning bolts around you, or are you gonna elevate above it? Are you going to slightly change your course, but not your destination? We all have to learn how to navigate turbulence, because the reality is our life is going to be punctuated by it. And how we react in those moments, it's not going to change the destination. It just might alter the course a little bit, and that's okay. So after you've navigated that turbulence, you've elevated, I hope that when you feel those moments of elevation and you've gotten through things that are really tough, you look down and honestly, you just find peace and you believe that your view is beautiful, because I do. I believe that everything that I went through, the delays, the emotional baggage, everything, the turbulence to get to where I am, it has made my view that much more beautiful. And you will find ways to navigate to your destination, because turbulence isn't going to make you turn around. It's going to alter your course, but it's not going to change the destination. You were destined to be exactly where you were headed. The journey is worthy. So the only things that I have to remind you are that if a over 100-ton jet engine, all of its fuel and all of the passengers, can find a way to take flight, because it's designed to, then you, my friends, can do the exact same. You are welcome to take flight. And this is your captain speaking. You're number one for takeoff. Thank you.